The gunshot echoed through the valley as Beatrice Lawson watched the wild Mustang fall, its magnificent body crumpling to the dusty earth. Her husband, Victor, stood with his smoking rifle, a cruel smile twisting his lips as he turned to her. "That's what happens to wild things that don't know their place," he said, his voice carrying on the Nevada wind like a threat she couldn't escape. Beatrice shivered despite the summer heat of 1879, her hand instinctively touching the fading bruise on her wrist, hidden beneath her lace cuff. 3 years into a marriage that had become her prison, she felt as trapped as the wild horses her husband captured and broke for profit in their sprawling ranch outside Tonopah. Victor Lawson had swept into her life when she was barely 19, the daughter of a struggling store owner in Carson City. Now, at 22, she had learned the hard truth behind his charm, that wealth could mask cruelty, and that marriage vows could become chains. The bruises on her body might fade, but the ones on her spirit were permanent. "Come, wife," Victor commanded, mounting his horse. "We have guests for dinner tonight. The banker and his family. I expect you to be presentable." Beatrice nodded, the practiced gesture of submission that had become as natural as breathing. She turned her mare toward their ranch house, the grandest in the county, built with Victor's inheritance and maintained with her silent suffering. As they rode, she watched a lone figure on horseback crest the distant ridge, a stranger, silhouetted against the vast Nevada sky. For just a moment, the sight stirred something inside her, a long-forgotten feeling that resembled hope. She quickly extinguished it. Hope was dangerous in a world where she belonged to a man who treated her like property. Still, she couldn't help glancing back once more at the disappearing rider, unaware that this chance sighting would soon change everything. The Lawson Ranch dominated the landscape, a 2-story white house surrounded by fenced corrals and outbuildings. Beatrice had once admired its grandeur. Now she saw only her elaborate cage. "The new horses will be arriving tomorrow," Victor informed her as they approached the stables. "A dozen Mustangs from the northern valleys. I've hired extra hands to break them." Beatrice's stomach twisted. She hated watching the brutal breaking of the wild horses, seeing their spirits crushed systematically until they became compliant shadows of their former selves. She saw too much of herself in their desperate eyes. "Will you need me to help with the ledgers?" she asked quietly, knowing her meticulous handwriting and skill with numbers were among the few things Victor valued about her. "Later, after you've made yourself useful with dinner preparations." He dismounted and handed the reins to a waiting stable boy. "And wear the blue dress tonight, the one that hides your thinness. I won't have people thinking I don't provide well for my wife." Beatrice nodded again, the familiar weight of his expectations settling across her shoulders. The blue dress also covered the fingerprint bruises on her upper arms from last week's disagreement about her correspondence with her cousin in San Francisco. Letters Victor now monitored with hawk-like scrutiny. The house was a flurry of activity when she entered, their housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, directing the 2 young maids with dinner preparations. The older woman gave Beatrice a sympathetic glance, one that held the knowledge of what happened behind closed doors but would never be spoken aloud. "The butcher delivered a fine roast, Mrs. Lawson," Mrs. Winters said. "And fresh breads just out of the oven." "Thank you." Beatrice removed her riding gloves and hat, setting them aside. "I'll change and be down to help shortly." In her bedroom, Beatrice stood before the ornate mirror, carefully unpinning her hair. The woman staring back at her seemed like a stranger, pale despite the Nevada sun, with shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and silent tears. But there was something else there too, something she rarely acknowledged, a flicker of defiance that not even Victor had fully extinguished. As she reached for her hairbrush, a movement outside caught her attention. Through the window, she saw a rider approaching the ranch not from the main road, but across the open range. Something about his easy posture in the saddle made her pause. The stranger rode a magnificent buckskin horse, both of them moving with a natural harmony that spoke of mutual respect rather than dominance. He wore simple clothes, dust covered from the trail, but even at a distance, there was a dignity in his bearing that distinguished him from the rough ranch hands Victor employed. Curious, Beatrice watched as he dismounted at the corral fence, speaking with one of the ranch hands who pointed toward the stables. Victor emerged from the barn, approaching the stranger with his characteristic assessment of anyone new looking for weaknesses, advantages, or threats. Beatrice couldn't hear their exchange, but she could read the body language well enough. Victor's initial suspicion gradually shifted to interest. A business opportunity, perhaps. The stranger nodded, shook Victor's hand, and then glanced up directly at her window. She stepped back hastily, heart suddenly racing. Had he seen her watching? The moment had lasted only seconds, but the intensity of that brief connection unsettled her. She hurried to finish dressing, trying to dismiss the encounter from her mind. The blue dress fit perfectly, designed to showcase her as Victor's beautiful possession while concealing the evidence of his temper. She pinned her auburn hair into a style that Victor deemed appropriately modest, applied rose water to her pulse points, and prepared to play her role as the devoted wife. When Beatrice descended the stairs, she was surprised to find Victor in the parlor with the stranger. "Ah, here she is," Victor said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Beatrice, this is Patrick Hayes. He's our new horse trainer specializing in breaking the more stubborn animals. Mr. Hayes comes highly recommended from ranches in Wyoming." Patrick Hayes stood as she entered, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with a face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in its rugged way. A thin scar ran along his jaw, hinting at stories untold. "Mrs. Lawson," he said with a slight bow of his head, his voice carrying a gentle depth that contrasted with Victor's sharp tones. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance." "Mr. Hayes," she responded with practiced politeness, careful not to meet his eyes for too long. She'd learned that showing too much interest in any man, even innocently, provoked Victor's jealousy. "Welcome to our home. Mr. Hayes will be staying in the trainer's cabin by the North Corral," Victor explained, his hand possessively finding the small of Beatrice's back. "He's agreed to work with the new Mustangs. I've heard he has quite the gift for taming even the wildest beasts without breaking their spirit entirely." Beatrice couldn't hide her surprise at this last statement. "I thought you preferred them broken completely," she said before thinking. Victor's fingers pressed harder against her spine, a warning. "Mr. Hayes has convinced me that horses retain more value when their training preserves some of their natural instincts. For the right buyers, of course." Patrick's gaze flickered briefly to Victor's hand on Beatrice's back, then to her face, something unreadable passing across his features. "It's a balance," Patrick said carefully, "between teaching them to accept human guidance while respecting what makes them special in the first place. Break them too harshly, and you end up with an animal that's lost everything that made it worth having." His words hung in the air, layered with meaning that made Beatrice's breath catch. Did he somehow see the parallel that had struck her so forcefully? "Philosophical for a horse trainer," Victor commented dryly, "but I'm interested in results, not philosophy. You'll start tomorrow with the new arrivals." "Yes, sir." Patrick replaced his hat, nodding respectfully to Beatrice. "I should see to my horse and get settled before dark. Mrs. "Winters will send a boy with some supper to your cabin later," Beatrice offered, earning another subtle pressure from Victor's fingers. "Much appreciated, madam." Patrick's eyes held hers for just a moment longer than necessary before he turned to leave, declining Victor's half-hearted offer to show him to his quarters. When the door closed behind him, Victor turned to Beatrice, his expression hardening. "Don't concern yourself with the help, my dear. Your duties are to this household and to me. Remember your place." The familiar words "your place" echoed in her mind, a reminder of the Mustang he'd shot that morning, a warning for wild things that didn't obey. "Of course, Victor," she murmured. "I was only being hospitable. The banker will be here in an hour. See that everything is perfect." He released her, straightening his vest. "I have business to discuss with him, and I won't have domestic shortcomings distracting from it." Beatrice nodded, relieved when he strode away to his study. She moved to the window, watching as Patrick led his buckskin to the water trough, speaking softly to the animal with obvious affection. The horse nudged his shoulder playfully, and a smile transformed the man's serious face. Something twisted painfully in Beatrice's chest, not just envy for the easy partnership between man and horse, but a deeper longing for freedom, for genuine connection, for a life where kindness wasn't a rare commodity to be hoarded in secret. She turned away from the window, burying such dangerous thoughts as she had for 3 years, focusing instead on the evening ahead and the role she must play. Yet as she checked the dining room arrangements, she couldn't entirely forget those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see beyond her carefully constructed facade. The dinner with the banker's family progressed as these affairs always did, polite conversation masking Victor's ruthless business machinations. His charm deployed strategically to secure favorable terms for his latest venture. Beatrice smiled and served and spoke when expected, a beautiful backdrop to her husband's ambitions. Later that night, after the guests had departed and Victor had retired to his separate bedroom, an arrangement he'd instituted after the doctor had confirmed she wasn't with child after 2 years of marriage, a failure, he laid squarely at her feet. Beatrice stood at her window in her nightgown, looking out at the vast Nevada landscape bathed in moonlight. In the distance, a small light glowed from the trainer's cabin. She wondered what kind of man this Patrick Hayes truly was, beyond the respectful manner and careful words. Someone who understood that value existed in wildness, in the very spirit Victor seemed determined to crush in everything around him, horses, land, and wife alike. She closed her eyes, remembering the Mustang from that morning, how it had run with such magnificent freedom before Victor's bullet found it. Perhaps that was better than capture, than the slow death of the spirit that came with surrendering to a cruel master's will. Such thoughts were treacherous. They were the kind that sometimes kept her awake, staring at the ceiling, contemplating what escape might look like if it were even possible. Victor's influence extended throughout the county. His friendship with the sheriff, the banker, and the judge formed a net that would make flight futile. Beatrice opened her eyes, banishing impossible dreams. Tomorrow would be another day of careful obedience, of moving through her life like a ghost in her own home. But as she turned from the window, she realized that, for the first time in months, she was curious about what tomorrow might bring, and that curiosity, dangerous as it might be, felt strangely like the first breath after being underwater too long. Dawn broke with the sound of hoofbeats. Beatrice, already dressed for the day, watched from the kitchen window as a string of wild horses was herded into the largest corral, magnificent creatures with flowing manes and eyes bright with fear and defiance. Among the wranglers was Patrick Hayes, directing the operation with calm authority. "They're beautiful," she murmured to Mrs. Winters, who was preparing breakfast. The older woman glanced up from her work. "Wild things usually are, Mrs. Lawson, though I doubt they'll stay that way long under Mr. Lawson's ownership." Beatrice bit her lip, watching as Victor strode from the house toward the corral, shouting orders that scattered the ranch hands like nervous chickens. Only Patrick remained steady, listening to Victor's instructions with a respectful nod that nonetheless didn't suggest subservience. "I think I'll bring some coffee to the men," Beatrice decided suddenly. "It's a chilly morning." Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow but said nothing as she helped prepare a large pot and cups on a tray. It wasn't unusual for Beatrice to perform such gestures. Victor appreciated the appearance of wifely devotion before others, but the timing was perhaps telling. Outside, the morning air carried the scent of sage and dust. Beatrice balanced the tray carefully as she approached the corral where the men had gathered. Victor was instructing Patrick about which horses were priorities for breaking. "That black stallion first," Victor was saying, pointing to a magnificent horse that paced the fence line, nostrils flaring. "He's the leader. Break him and the others will follow more easily." Patrick studied the horse with a thoughtful expression. "He's a proud one. Might be better to start with one of the younger mares, establish the process. Let the others observe that there's no harm in it." Victor's face darkened. "I didn't hire you to question my methods, Hayes. That stallion sets the example for the herd. I want him compliant by the end of the week." "As you wish, Mr. Lawson," Patrick replied, his tone neutral but his jaw tight. He turned, noticing Beatrice approaching with the tray. "Let me help you with that, Mrs. Lawson." He moved quickly to take the heavy tray, his hands briefly touching hers in the exchange. Beatrice felt a strange flutter in her stomach at the contact, immediately followed by anxiety as she caught Victor's narrowed gaze. "Coffee for everyone," she announced with a bright smile that felt brittle on her face. "I thought you could use something warm with the early start." The ranch hands murmured their thanks, gathering around as Patrick set the tray on a fence post. Victor approached, taking a cup and studying Beatrice over its rim. "How thoughtful of my wife," he said, the words coated in honey but his eyes cold. "Always concerned with others' comfort." Beatrice recognized the warning in his tone. "Just doing my part to help the ranch run smoothly," she replied carefully. "Your domestic duties await you inside, my dear. No need to linger where you might get hurt." Victor gestured toward the house, his command clear despite the pleasant phrasing. Beatrice nodded, taking the empty tray. As she turned to leave, Patrick spoke up. "Mrs. Lawson, if you have any interest in horses, you're welcome to observe the initial assessment. I'll be evaluating each animal's temperament before beginning any training." His invitation was professional, nothing that could be construed as improper, yet bold in its directness. Before she could respond, Victor laughed. "My wife's delicate sensibilities aren't suited to the rougher aspects of ranch work, Hayes. She's more comfortable with her embroidery and piano playing." Beatrice felt a flush of humiliation mixed with anger. She had grown up around horses, had even helped her father break colts before her marriage. Victor knew this, but he had systematically separated her from all the activities that had once brought her joy, insisting they were unladylike or unsafe. "Actually," she said, surprising herself with her steadiness, "I would be interested to observe if it wouldn't be in the way. I've always loved horses." The silence that followed was weighted with tension. Victor's smile remained fixed, but his eyes promised consequences. "What a delightful idea," he finally said. "Perhaps later this week when things are more organized. For now, though, we have the Hendersons coming for tea at 11, and I believe you mentioned wanting to bake those almond cookies they so enjoy." The excuse was transparent but the message clear. Beatrice nodded, accepting the temporary defeat. Of course. Another time, perhaps, Mr. Hayes. Patrick tipped his hat, his expression giving nothing away. Whenever is convenient, Mrs. Lawson. As Beatrice walked back to the house, she could feel Victor's gaze boring into her back. She had overstepped, and there would be a price to pay later. Yet underneath her anxiety was a tiny spark of rebellion that she couldn't quite extinguish. For the first time in years, she had voiced a desire of her own in public, contradicted Victor's characterization of her nature. It was a small thing, practically nothing, but it felt monumental. Inside, Mrs. Winters took one look at her flushed face and quietly closed the kitchen door. "You're playing with fire, Mrs. Lawson," the housekeeper said softly. Beatrice set down the tray with shaking hands. "I only expressed interest in the horses. It's not the horses that concern me." Mrs. Winters glanced meaningfully toward the window, where Patrick could be seen leading the black stallion into a separate pen. "That man isn't like the other hired hands. He notices things, and Mr. Lawson doesn't like people who notice too much." Beatrice wanted to deny any particular interest in Patrick Hayes, but the knowing look in the older woman's eyes made lies pointless. Instead, she turned to the pantry to gather ingredients for the almond cookies, seeking refuge in the familiar rhythm of baking. "Nothing will happen, Mrs. Winters," she said firmly, as much to convince herself as the housekeeper. "Nothing can happen," the woman sighed. "Just be careful, child. Men like your husband don't lose what they consider their property without a fight." The word property hung in the air, a painful truth that Beatrice couldn't dispute. In the eyes of the law and society, that's precisely what she was, a beautiful possession, whose value lay in her obedience and ornamental qualities. Later, as she carefully arranged the fresh cookies on Victor's mother's china plates, she watched through the window as Patrick worked with the black stallion. Unlike the brutal methods Victor's previous trainers had employed, roping, throwing, and essentially torturing the animals into submission, Patrick moved slowly, deliberately, establishing boundaries without violence. Even from a distance, she could see how he never turned his back on the horse but also never threatened it, maintaining a respectful dance of wills. It was fascinating, almost hypnotic, to watch the gradual reduction of space between man and horse, the stallion's initial fear slowly giving way to cautious curiosity. "He has quite the touch with animals." Beatrice startled at Victor's voice behind her. She hadn't heard him enter the kitchen. "I was just checking on the cookies," she explained quickly, stepping away from the window. Victor approached, standing so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath, though it wasn't yet noon. "Do you know why I hired Hayes?" he asked, his voice conversational in a way that always made her wary. "His reputation with horses, I assumed." "Partially." Victor picked up a cookie, examining it before taking a bite, "but mainly because he's known for producing results quickly without leaving marks." The horses emerge compliant, but still looking pristine, no visible scars or injuries to reduce their market value. He smiled thinly. "A valuable skill, wouldn't you agree?" The implication chilled her. Victor's methods of control were similar, the bruises carefully placed where clothing would hide them, his punishments designed to break resistance without leaving evidence that might raise questions among their social circle. "The Hendersons will be here soon," she said, changing the subject. "Shall I serve tea in the front parlor?" Victor allowed the diversion, nodding as he finished the cookie. "Perfect as always, my dear. This is why we make such an excellent team. You maintain our social standing with these little touches, while I build our fortune." The false warmth in his voice made her skin crawl, but she smiled and nodded, the dutiful wife. As she arranged the tea service, She couldn't help wondering what Patrick Hayes would think of this performance, or if he had already seen through it to the truth beneath. The thought was dangerous, but she couldn't seem to banish it as easily as she once had such rebellious musings. Something had changed, some small ember rekindled that she'd thought long extinguished. Whether it would warm her or consume her remained to be seen. The Hendersons' visit passed in a blur of meaningless pleasantries and Victor's careful cultivation of business connections. Throughout, Beatrice performed flawlessly, the accomplished hostess whose every gesture reflected well on her husband. Only when they departed did she allow the smile to fade from her face, the muscles of her cheeks aching from the prolonged pretense. "Well done," Victor commented, loosening his collar as they stood in the foyer. "William is considering investing in our expansion." "Your charm certainly didn't hurt matters." Beatrice accepted the rare compliment with a nod, already turning toward the stairs. "If you'll excuse me, I have a headache coming on. I think I'll rest before dinner." Victor caught her wrist, his fingers digging into the delicate skin. "Not yet. Come with me to my study. I want to discuss this morning's indiscretion." Her heart sank, but she followed obediently, her body already tensing in anticipation of what was to come. Inside the wood-paneled room that served as the center of Victor's business operations, he closed the door firmly and gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his imposing desk. Instead of taking his own seat, he remained standing, pouring himself a generous measure of bourbon from the crystal decanter. "You embarrass me today, Beatrice," he said, his back to her as he swirled the amber liquid. "Contradicting my assessment of your interests, inserting yourself into ranch operations. It creates confusion about who makes decisions in this household." "I apologize, Victor. It wasn't my intention to embarrass you." The words came automatically, a script she'd performed countless times. He turned, studying her with cold blue eyes. "I'm concerned about your behavior lately. The letters to your cousin that I had to intercept with their thinly veiled complaints about your life here. Your sudden interest in the ranch operations. Your obvious fascination with our new horse trainer." Don't lie to me," he cut her off sharply. "I saw how you looked at him. I'm not a fool, Beatrice." She swallowed hard. "I was simply interested in his methods. They're different from what I've seen before." Victor approached, standing over her chair in a position of deliberate intimidation. "You've been restless, questioning my decisions. Perhaps I've been too lenient, allowed you too much freedom around the property." The threat was clear. Her already restricted life could become even more confined if Victor felt his control slipping. "I understand my place, Victor," she said quietly, hating the defeated tone in her voice but knowing it was what he wanted to hear. "It won't happen again." He studied her face for a long moment before nodding, seemingly satisfied with her submission. "Good. Now about Hayes. I want you to maintain your distance. He works for me, but he's still an unknown quantity. Men who wander from ranch to ranch rarely have clean histories." "Of course." She folded her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "You may go rest now," he said, dismissing her as he moved to his desk. "We'll dine at 7. The Rawlins are joining us." Beatrice rose, keeping her movements steady and dignified despite her relief at escaping with just a warning. At the door, Victor's voice stopped her. "One more thing, my dear. I've decided to accelerate our timetable for breaking the new horses. The Army contract has moved up, and we need to deliver sooner than expected. You'll hear some commotion from the corral's methods might become less gentle than Hayes initially planned. I wouldn't want you to be alarmed." She understood the real message. Victor was asserting his control over Patrick's work, forcing him to abandon his more humane techniques in favor of quicker results. It was a demonstration of power, and possibly a test of the new trainer's willingness to comply with questionable demands. "I understand," she replied, carefully keeping any emotion from her voice. Outside in the hallway, Beatrice leaned against the wall for a moment, gathering her composure. Through the window at the end of the corridor, she could see Patrick still working with the black stallion, his patience evident even at a distance. Soon, Victor would force him to betray that patient approach or reveal himself as someone unwilling to compromise his principles for profit. Either way, the brief hope she'd felt that morning seemed suddenly foolish. Patrick Hayes was just a man passing through their lives, subject to Victor's authority like everyone else in Tanapa. To imagine him as anything more had been a dangerous indulgence of fantasy. In her bedroom, Beatrice lay atop the counterpane fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. The headache she'd claimed was now real, throbbing behind her eyes with each beat of her heart. Outside, the afternoon was fading toward evening, shadows lengthening across the Nevada landscape. A commotion from the direction of the corrals drew her attention. Rising to look out the window, she saw Victor striding purposefully toward where Patrick worked, followed by two of the rougher ranch hands. Even from a distance, the confrontation was clear, Victor gesturing emphatically, Patrick shaking his head. The two men flanking Victor moving to retrieve ropes and what looked like whips from the tack room. She couldn't hear the exchange, but she could imagine it well enough. Victor was implementing his accelerated schedule, demanding results through force rather than patience. The question was whether Patrick would comply or stand his ground. For a moment, it seemed he might resist. His back straightened, and he gestured toward the stallion, clearly arguing his case. But then Victor said something that made Patrick's shoulders sag slightly. He nodded, taking the offered rope from one of the hands, though he refused the whip. Beatrice felt a disproportionate disappointment flood through her. Of course, he would comply. Victor held the power of employment, of references, of reputation. What choice did a wandering horse trainer have but to follow his employer's methods? She turned away from the window, unable to watch what would follow. The sound of a horse's frightened whinny made her flinch, followed by shouting and the crack of a whip that Patrick had apparently not wielded himself. Victor would have his way, as always. The stallion's spirit would break, just as hers had. Beatrice moved to her dressing table, mechanically beginning preparations for dinner with the Rawlins. She pinned her hair more elaborately than usual, applied a touch of rouge to hide her pallor, and selected the green silk dress that Victor had purchased for her birthday, all armor against his displeasure, all part of maintaining the fiction of their perfect marriage. When she descended the stairs an hour later, she was surprised to find the house silent, no signs of dinner preparations or arriving guests. Mrs. Winters emerged from the kitchen, her expression concerned. "Mr. Lawson sent word that dinner with the Rawlins is postponed," the housekeeper explained. "There's been an incident at the corrals." Alarm shot through Beatrice. "Is someone hurt?" Mrs. Winters hesitated. "Not exactly, madam." It seems Mr. Hayes refused to continue with Mr. Lawson's methods for breaking the stallion. There was quite the confrontation. "What happened?" Beatrice asked, her heart suddenly racing. The stallion panicked with all the commotion, broke through the fence. Mr. Hayes went after it, against Mr. Lawson's orders. The older woman lowered her voice. "Mr. Lawson was in quite a state. Said if Hayes doesn't return with that horse by morning, he needn't return at all." Beatrice's mind raced with implications. Patrick had defied Victor publicly in front of the ranch hands. It was unheard of. No one challenged Victor Lawson's authority on his own property. "Where is my husband now?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "In his study with Mr. Simmons, Mrs." Winters replied, referring to Victor's foreman. "They're discussing replacements for Mr. Hayes, I believe." So it was already decided Patrick would not be returning with or without the horse. Victor would never tolerate such insubordination, especially in front of his men. "I see," Beatrice said, smoothing her skirts needlessly. "Well, I suppose I'll take a light supper in my room then, since our plans have changed." Mrs. Winters nodded, studying Beatrice's face with knowing eyes. "Yes, madam. I'll bring something up shortly." Alone in her room with a tray of food she couldn't bring herself to touch, Beatrice sat by the window watching night fall over the Nevada desert. Somewhere out there, Patrick Hayes was tracking a frightened stallion through the darkness, having sacrificed his position rather than submit to cruelty. The realization shifted something inside her. For 3 years, she had believed resistance was futile, that submission was the only path to survival. Yet this man, a stranger with no personal stake beyond his own principles, had chosen differently. Had walked away from security rather than compromise what he believed was right. What might she do if she found similar courage? The question haunted her as she prepared for bed, as she lay awake listening for hoofbeats that never came, as she finally drifted into troubled sleep, filled with dreams of running horses and open skies. Morning brought no sign of Patrick or the stallion. Victor was in a thunderous mood, barking orders at the ranch hands and informing Beatrice over breakfast that he'd sent to Carson City for a new trainer, one with fewer moral reservations about getting results. "Hayes is finished in this territory," Victor declared, buttering his toast with vicious strokes. "I'll see to it that no reputable ranch hires him after this stunt." Beatrice sipped her tea, hiding her reaction behind the delicate china cup. "Perhaps the horse is simply difficult to track," she suggested cautiously. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Don't defend him. The man is an idealistic fool who forgot who pays his wages." He set down his knife with a clatter. "I'll be riding to Tonopah today to speak with Sheriff Miller about keeping an eye out for Hayes and my property. I expect I'll return tomorrow morning." An overnight absence was rare. Victor typically conducted his business so that he returned home each evening, maintaining his vigilant presence in the household. "I'll have Mrs. Winters prepare extra food for your journey," Beatrice offered, her mind already racing with the implications of his absence. "See that you do." Victor rose from the table. "And Beatrice, while I'm gone, I expect you to remain at the house. No rides, no visits to town. The last thing I need is to worry about you getting ideas from Hayes's little rebellion." She lowered her eyes submissively. "Of course, Victor. I have plenty to occupy me here." He studied her for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with her compliance. "Good. I'll have Simmons check on you this evening. He'll report to me if anything seems amiss." The threat was clear, as was the implication that she was being watched even in his absence. Beatrice maintained her facade of dutiful acceptance, seeing Victor off later that morning with appropriate wifely concern. Only when his figure had disappeared down the road did she allow herself to breathe more freely. An entire day and night without Victor's oppressive presence, it shouldn't have felt like such a gift, but it did. Even with Simmons's promised check-in, she would have hours of relative freedom. Beatrice spent the morning on her normal domestic duties, giving no indication to the house staff or ranch hands that today was any different from any other. She reviewed household accounts, arranged flowers from the garden, and practiced piano in the parlor, all activities that Victor approved of, all visible to anyone who might be observing her movements. It was mid-afternoon when she spotted a figure on horseback approaching from the eastern ridge, not from the direction of town, but from the open country. Through the parlor window, she watched as the rider drew closer, recognition dawning. Patrick Hayes, mounted on his buckskin, leading the black stallion with a loose rope that gave the animal plenty of freedom to move. Both horses moved at an easy walk, no signs of distress or fear. Beatrice's heart leapt to her throat. What was he doing, returning here? Victor was gone, but his influence remained. Simmons or any of the loyal hands would report Patrick's appearance immediately. Without stopping to consider the consequences, she hurried out the back door, cutting across the kitchen garden to intercept Patrick before he reached the main yard. Mrs. Winters called after her in confusion, but Beatrice didn't pause to explain. She reached the side paddock just as Patrick approached, his expression registering surprise at her breathless appearance. "Mr. Hayes," she called, gesturing urgently for him to stop. "You shouldn't be here. My husband has gone to town to speak with the sheriff about you." Patrick reined his horse, studying her flushed face. "Mrs. Lawson," he acknowledged with a nod. "I'm not here to cause trouble, just returning what isn't mine to take." The stallion beside him tossed its head, but remained remarkably calm considering its panic the day before. Beatrice noted there wasn't a mark on the magnificent animal, no evidence of whips or rough handling. "How did you catch him without?" She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the cruelty she'd expected would be necessary. Patrick's expression softened slightly. "Time and patience, madam. Found him about 5 miles east, exhausted and thirsty. Led him to water, let him rest, showed him I meant no harm. By morning, he was willing to follow me back, long as I didn't push him." His eyes held hers. "Most living things just want to be treated with basic dignity." The words hung between them, laden with meaning that extended far beyond horse training. "Victor won't see it that way," she said quietly. "He's already arranged for a new trainer, one who will use whatever methods necessary to break these horses quickly." Patrick's jaw tightened. "That's why I came back. It's not right what he's planning for them." He hesitated, then added, "Nor what he's already done to you." Beatrice froze, instinctively glancing around to see if anyone had overheard. "You don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. "Don't I?" Patrick's gaze was steady, compassionate rather than pitying. "I've worked on enough ranches to recognize the signs, Mrs. Lawson. The way you flinch when he moves too quickly. The bruises you try to hide. The fear in your eyes when you think no one's looking." Shame and relief warred within her, shame at having her secrets exposed, relief at finally being seen. "It's not your concern," she managed, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Maybe not," he agreed, "but I couldn't leave without making sure you knew something." He leaned forward in the saddle, his voice low but intense. "There are other possibilities beyond these fences. Other ways to live." The dangerous hope she'd been suppressing flared brighter. "Not for me. Victor would never allow a divorce, and if I ran—" She shook her head. "He has connections everywhere. He would find me." "Not everywhere," Patrick said simply. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense. Around the corner of the barn came Simmons, Victor's loyal foreman, his expression darkening when he spotted them. "Hayes," he called, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "You're trespassing on Lawson property. The boss said you're not welcome here anymore." Patrick straightened in the saddle but made no move toward his own weapon. "Just returning the stallion, Simmons. Then I'll be on my way." Simmons's gaze shifted between Patrick and Beatrice, suspicion evident. "Mrs. Lawson, you should be inside. Mr. Lawson was clear about you staying in the house. I saw Mr. Hayes approaching and came to inform him that my husband is away," Beatrice explained, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He was just leaving." Simmons didn't look convinced. "I'll take the horse, Hayes. You ride out now and keep riding. Mr. Lawson's talking to the sheriff about charges for stealing that stallion." "Can't steal what followed willingly," Patrick replied, but he dismounted and handed the stallion's lead rope to Simmons. His eyes met Beatrice's one last time, something urgent in his gaze. "Remember what I said, Mrs. Lawson, about possibilities." She nodded slightly, barely perceptible, before turning toward the house. "Good day, Mr. Hayes. Safe travels." Beatrice didn't look back as she walked away, feeling Simmons's suspicious gaze on her back. She knew the foreman would report this encounter to Victor. There was no preventing that now. All she could do was minimize the damage by returning to her routine, giving no further indication that Patrick Hayes's words had affected her. Inside, Mrs. Winters was waiting with worried eyes. "You shouldn't have gone out there, Mrs. Lawson. Mr. Simmons is sure to tell the master." "I know," Beatrice replied, removing her shawl, "but it doesn't matter now." The housekeeper studied her face. "What's happened? You look different." Beatrice touched her cheeks, wondering what the older woman saw there, the dangerous hope that had taken root. The first stirrings of a decision too momentous to fully comprehend yet. "Nothing's happened," she said, moving toward the stairs. "I think I'll rest until dinner." In her room, Beatrice didn't rest. Instead, she moved with quiet purpose, removing a small leather case from the back of her wardrobe. Inside was the only money that was truly hers, a modest inheritance from her grandmother that Victor didn't know about, carefully hoarded and hidden. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. Next, she retrieved the letters from her cousin in San Francisco that she'd managed to hide from Victor, correspondence that spoke of women finding work as teachers, shopkeepers, even bookkeepers in the growing city. Possibilities, just as Patrick had said. Beatrice sat on the edge of her bed, heart pounding as she contemplated what she was considering. To leave would mean abandoning everything familiar, becoming a fugitive from her own marriage, risking destitution if Victor found her before she could establish herself elsewhere. To stay meant the slow death of her spirit, the continuation of fear and pain, perhaps for decades to come. As twilight fell, she made no decisions, but she packed a small bag with essentials and hid it under her bed. Just in case, just to know she could. Dinner was a solitary affair in the dining room. The empty chair at the head of the table, a temporary reprieve, rather than the permanent absence she had sometimes darkly wished for in her most desperate moments. Afterward, Simmons arrived for his promised check, knocking at the front door with heavy authority. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, hat in hand but his posture rigid. "Just making sure everything's in order as Mr. Lawson requested." "Of course, Mr. Simmons. Would you like to come in?" She offered, knowing he would refuse. Victor's men never entered the house proper unless specifically ordered to. "No need, madam, just doing my duty." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "About today with Hayes." Beatrice kept her expression neutral. "Yes. I'll have to mention it to the boss, you understand, but—" He hesitated, surprising her. "I could say you were just telling him to leave, making it clear he wasn't welcome. That would be more helpful for you." She studied the weathered foreman's face, wondering at this unexpected small kindness. Had he seen more than she realized over the years? Did he pity her? "Thank you, Mr. Simmons," she said quietly. "I would appreciate that." He nodded, replacing his hat. "Get some rest, Mrs. Lawson. Boss'll be back by mid-morning tomorrow." After he left, Beatrice stood in the foyer for a long moment, considering his words. Mid-morning tomorrow. The hours of Victor's absence were dwindling rapidly. If she were going to act, it would have to be soon. Tonight, in fact. But where would she go? How would she travel? Victor would expect her to flee toward Carson City or San Francisco, would have the sheriff watching the roads and the stage stations. As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, a memory surfaced, Patrick describing where he'd found the stallion. 5 miles east, he'd said. away from the roads, into the open country where Victor's influence might not reach quite so far. Was it possible Patrick had left her a clue? A suggestion of which direction to take if she found the courage to flee? Outside her window, the moon rose over the eastern ridgeline, silvering the landscape. In that direction lay more ranches eventually, and beyond them, mining towns and settlements that might offer anonymity, at least temporarily. Or was she grasping at straws, seeing meaning where there was none? Beatrice didn't sleep that night. She sat fully dressed by her window, watching the moon trace its arc across the sky, weighing fear against hope, safety against freedom. By the time the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern horizon, she had made her decision. Moving silently through the still dark house, Beatrice left a brief note for Mrs. Winters, the only person she trusted not to immediately betray her, asking her to delay raising the alarm as long as possible. She took her hidden bag, her money, and a small locket containing a miniature portrait of her mother, the only personal possession she couldn't bear to leave behind. The stables were quiet, the night guard dozing in the tack room. Beatrice had grown up around horses. Saddling her mare was a task she could perform by touch and memory. She led the animal out the back way, walking until they were well beyond earshot of the ranch buildings before mounting and turning east toward the rising sun. As she urged the mare into a steady canter across the open country, Beatrice felt a wild surge of terror mixed with exhilaration. She had done it, taken the unthinkable step, broken the invisible chains. There would be no going back now. Victor would discover her absence within hours. He would be furious, would pursue her with all the considerable resources at his disposal. She had perhaps a day's head start at most, and no clear destination beyond the vague hope that somehow Patrick Hayes might have left her a path to follow. The sun climbed higher, the Nevada landscape stark and beautiful around her. Beatrice kept to the rough country, avoiding trails and roads where she might be spotted. Her riding habits had been one of the few freedoms Victor had allowed her, recognizing that restricting her too severely might raise questions among their social circle. Now that freedom became her advantage, she knew this land, its contours and hiding places, better than many of Victor's men. By mid-morning, when Victor would be returning to the ranch, Beatrice had covered several miles. She paused in a sheltered draw to rest her horse and consider her next move. The immediate rush of escape was fading, replaced by the sobering reality of her situation. She was alone in rough country with limited supplies and no clear destination. If she continued east, she would eventually reach settlements, but Victor would surely send telegrams ahead, alerting authorities to watch for her. As she filled her canteen from a small spring, movement on the ridgeline above caught her attention. A rider, silhouetted against the sky, watching her. Beatrice's heart nearly stopped, her hand instinctively moving to the small Derringer pistol she'd taken from Victor's desk, draw a pitiful defense, but better than nothing. The rider descended toward her, and as he came into clearer view, she recognized the buckskin horse before she could make out its rider's face. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her knees weak. Patrick dismounted several yards away, approaching slowly as if afraid of frightening her. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, his voice carrying easily in the clear air. "I was hoping you might come this way." "You waited for me," she said, the realization dawning. "You never intended to leave the area." He shook his head. "Not without knowing you were safe. After seeing Simmons yesterday, I figured Lawson would be back soon and you might." He hesitated. "I hoped you might decide to leave." "I couldn't stay," she said simply. "Not anymore." Patrick nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You've shown more courage than most men I know, riding out alone like this, or more foolishness," she countered. Victor will hunt me down. He'll never let me go. That's why you shouldn't be traveling alone. Patrick took a step closer. I know places he won't think to look, routes that don't appear on any map. If you'll trust me, I can help you reach somewhere safe. Beatrice studied him, this man she barely knew yet who had risked his own safety to offer her a chance at freedom. Why would you do this? You don't owe me anything. Patrick's expression grew serious. Maybe not, but I've seen what men like your husband do to break spirits, horse or human. Sometimes standing by is the same as being complicit. He paused. Besides, I reckon everyone deserves a chance at a life that's their own. The simple truth of his words resonated deeply. A life that was her own, not Victor's possession, not an ornament for his ambitions, but truly hers to shape and direct. It seemed an impossible luxury, a dream too fragile to grasp. I don't even know where to go, she admitted. I have some money, but not enough to start over completely, and Victor has connections in every major town in Nevada. Patrick nodded thoughtfully. I know a small settlement beyond the Toyabe Range. It's off the main routes, mostly miners and a few ranching families. A friend of mine runs a boarding house there. You could rest, plan your next move. He hesitated. I could take you there if you're willing. The offer hung between them: help, guidance, but also companionship on a journey fraught with danger. Beatrice knew accepting meant placing enormous trust in this man she'd known for mere days. Yet something in his steady gaze, in the way he had defended the stallion against Victor's cruelty, gave her courage. I would be grateful for your help, Mr. Hayes, she said finally. Though I don't wish to endanger you further, Victor will blame you for my disappearance. A slight smile touched his lips. He already blames me for enough that a little more won't matter, and it's Patrick, please. If we're to be traveling companions, formalities seem unnecessary. Then you should call me Beatrice. The simple exchange of first names felt strangely significant, a small reclaiming of identity after years as Mrs. Lawson. Beatrice, he repeated, the name sounding different in his voice, not a possession or a title, but a recognition of her as a person in her own right. We should move on. Your husband will have discovered your absence by now. The reminder of the danger spurred her to action. She mounted her mare while Patrick checked her saddle and bridle, ensuring everything was secure for the difficult journey ahead. We'll head northeast, he explained, swinging into his own saddle. It's rougher country but less traveled. We can make the first range by nightfall if we push on. Beatrice nodded, determined. I can keep up. I've been riding these hills since childhood. Patrick's approving glance warmed her more than it should have. I never doubted it. Let's ride. They set off at a steady pace, Patrick leading the way through terrain that grew increasingly rugged as they left the ranch lands behind. He set a course that avoided the main trails but remained passable for their horses, occasionally pausing to check for signs of pursuit or to allow the animals brief rest. As they rode, Beatrice felt the weight of her old life falling away with each mile. The constant fear, the careful monitoring of every word and gesture, the pressure to be the perfect ornamental wife, all receding like a tide, leaving her exhausted but strangely light. By late afternoon, they had covered significant ground, the distant peaks of the mountain range growing clearer ahead. Patrick found a sheltered hollow near a small creek where they could rest the horses and eat some of the provisions he had packed. Your husband will have men searching the routes to Carson City and the other main towns, he said, as they sat in the shade of a large boulder. But it will take time to organize a search of the back country. We have perhaps a day before they think to look this direction. Beatrice accepted the dried beef and hardtack he offered. What will happen when we reach this settlement you mentioned? I can't simply hide forever. Patrick considered the question. You'll need to establish yourself somewhere eventually, perhaps California or even further east. But first, we need distance and time." He glanced at her. "Do you have skills besides being a rancher's wife?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, her entire identity had been wrapped up in her role as Victor's wife. "I keep excellent accounts," she said after a moment. "Before I married, I helped my father with his store ledgers. I can also teach. I had a proper education in Carson City." Patrick nodded. "Both valuable skills that could earn you a living. Many growing towns need teachers or bookkeepers." The idea of supporting herself through honest work rather than surviving through submission to Victor's demands was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Do you really think it's possible that I could start fresh somewhere?" "I know it is," Patrick said with quiet confidence. "I've seen women do it, widows, yes, but also those who have left situations like yours. It won't be easy, but it's possible." His belief in her possibilities kindled something warm in Beatrice's chest. For 3 years, Victor had systematically dismantled her confidence, convinced her that she was helpless without him. To have someone see strength and capability in her instead was a revelation. "What about you?" she asked, suddenly curious about the man who had upended his own life to help her. "What will you do after?" "After I'm settled somewhere," Patrick shrugged, his gaze on the distant mountains. "What I've always done, find work with horses, move on when it's time." He glanced at her. "Though I'll admit, defying your husband might make finding legitimate work in Nevada more challenging for a while." Guilt twisted in her stomach. "I'm sorry to have cost you your reputation." "Don't be," he said firmly. "That was my choice and one I'd make again. Some things matter more than a job or a reference." The conviction in his voice stirred something in Beatrice's admiration. Certainly, but something else too, something that made her cheeks warm when their eyes met. She looked away, busying herself with repacking their supplies. "We should keep moving," she said, rising to her feet. "I don't want to lose the daylight." Patrick nodded, helping her secure the packs before they mounted again. As they rode, Beatrice found herself studying his profile. When he looked ahead, the strong line of his jaw with its faint scar, the quiet concentration in his eyes as he assessed the terrain. He was nothing like Victor, whose handsome features masked a cold cruelty. Patrick's ruggedness held a gentleness that became more apparent the longer she knew him. By sunset, they had reached the foothills of the range. Patrick led them to a small canyon where a natural overhang provided shelter, and the rock walls would hide their campfire from distant observers. "We'll rest here for the night," he said, dismounting and helping Beatrice down from her mare. "Tomorrow will be harder riding through the pass, but there's a small homestead on the other side where we can get fresh supplies." As darkness fell, they built a small fire, just enough for warmth in the cooling desert night. Sitting across from each other in the flickering light, Beatrice felt a strange sense of peace despite the circumstances. Here, miles from civilization with a man she barely knew, she paradoxically felt safer than she had in her own home for years. "May I ask you something?" she said after they had eaten a simple meal of jerky, biscuits, and coffee. Patrick nodded, his face half in shadow. "Of course." "How did you know? About me, I mean. About what my life with Victor was truly like." She had wondered this since his confession the previous day. He was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "I've seen it before," he finally said. "My mother lived that way with my father, a respected businessman in Denver who beat her behind closed doors for 15 years. Beatrice's breath caught. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrible for you both." Patrick's expression remained carefully neutral, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. "She finally ran, took me with her when I was 12. We made it to Wyoming, changed our names, started over." A small, sad smile touched his lips. She was the bravest person I've ever known. Taught school in a mining town until she died 5 years ago. And your father, Beatrice asked softly, searched for a while, then gave up. Last I heard, he'd remarried, probably found another woman to control. His gaze met hers across the fire. That's how I recognized it in you, that careful watchfulness, always anticipating the next blow, physical or otherwise. I saw my mother in your eyes. The simple honesty of his explanation moved her deeply. His help wasn't just charity or chivalry, it was personal, born of his own history. Thank you for telling me, she said, and for helping me. I don't think I would have found the courage to leave without seeing you stand up to Victor first. Patrick shook his head. The courage was always there. You just needed to see that there were options. They fell into companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. Eventually, Patrick rose to check on the horses while Beatrice spread her bedroll near the fire. The physical exhaustion of the day's ride combined with the emotional toll of her escape left her bone weary. When Patrick returned, he set his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire, maintaining a respectful distance that Beatrice both appreciated and, confusingly, regretted. Get some rest, he said, settling onto his blanket. I'll keep watch for a while. Beatrice nodded, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. Wake me for the second watch. You need rest too. He smiled slightly but made no promise. As she drifted toward sleep, Beatrice's last conscious thought was that, for the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of hope for a future that might hold more than mere survival. She woke to the gentle touch of Patrick's hand on her shoulder and the pale light of pre-dawn filtering into their sheltered camp. We need to move, he said quietly, already dressed and alert. I heard riders in the distance about an hour ago. Could be nothing, but we shouldn't take chances. Fully awake in an instant, Beatrice rose and quickly gathered her few belongings. You didn't wake me for watch, she noted as they saddled the horses. You needed the rest more than I needed the sleep, he replied simply, helping her mount. We'll make up for it tonight. They set out as the first rays of sun touched the mountaintops, following a narrow game trail that wound upward into the range. The terrain grew steadily more challenging, but Beatrice's mare was sure-footed, and she herself was a confident rider despite Victor's attempts to limit her activities. By mid-morning they had climbed significantly. The valley behind them spread out in a panorama that took Beatrice's breath away. From this height, she could see for miles, including, far in the distance, what might have been dust from multiple riders moving along one of the main trails. Is that? She began, pointing. Patrick followed her gaze, his expression grim. Could be. Lawson would have gathered men quickly. They're heading west, though they haven't picked up our trail yet. The sight of potential pursuers spurred them onward, pushing through the mountain pass with greater urgency. The trail grew steeper, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through particularly treacherous sections. The homestead I mentioned is about 3 hours beyond the pass, Patrick explained as they paused to rest the animals. Family named Peterson. They keep to themselves, but they're good people. We can get food there, maybe fresh horses if they can spare them. Can they be trusted? Beatrice asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. If Victor offers a reward. Patrick's expression softened. Not everyone can be bought, Beatrice. The Petersons took me in years ago when I was just a kid on the run with my mother. They understand about starting fresh. His reassurance calmed her fears somewhat. They continued on, reaching the summit of the pass by early afternoon. The view from the top revealed a different landscape on the eastern side, more rugged, less inhabited, a territory where nature still held dominance over human settlement. As they began their descent, Beatrice felt a surge of triumph mixed with disbelief. She had done it, crossed a mountain range, left her old life behind, taken the first real steps toward freedom. The enormity of it threatened to overwhelm her. "You're doing fine," Patrick said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "One step at a time is all it takes." His steady presence beside her was an anchor in the sea of uncertainty. Beatrice straightened her shoulders and nodded, focusing on the path ahead rather than the vastness of what lay behind and before her. They reached the Peterson homestead. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, a sturdy cabin with outbuildings, nestled in a small valley with a creek running through it. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a dog's bark announced their approach before they reached the gate. A weathered man with a shotgun emerged from the cabin, followed by a woman wiping her hands on an apron. Both wore expressions of caution that melted into welcome when they recognized Patrick. "Hayes, you old scoundrel," the man called, lowering his weapon. "Martha, look who's finally remembered where we live." Patrick dismounted with a grin, clasping the man's outstretched hand. "John, Martha, good to see you both. It's been too long." Martha Peterson embraced Patrick warmly before turning her kind gaze to Beatrice. "And who's your friend, Patrick?" Beatrice tensed, unsure how much to reveal, but Patrick handled the introduction smoothly. "This is Beatrice," he said simply. "She's traveling to find work out east. I'm helping her through the rough country." Martha's shrewd eyes took in Beatrice's fine riding clothes, the quality of her mare and the wedding ring still on her finger, but she asked no questions. "Well, you're both welcome here. Come inside and rest while John sees to your horses." The cabin's interior was modest but comfortable, filled with the aroma of fresh bread and stew. Beatrice found herself enveloped in the warmth of simple hospitality as Martha served them food and insisted they stay the night. "The spare room is yours," she told Beatrice. "Patrick can bunk with John in the workshop as he's done before." After the meal, as John and Patrick stepped outside to check on the horses, Martha sat beside Beatrice at the table, her weathered hands folding over Beatrice's. "I won't ask your story," the older woman said gently. "But I know the look of a woman running from something. Whatever it is, you're safe here." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to repay such generosity to a stranger." Martha squeezed her hands. "Someday, when you're settled and safe, you'll help another woman who needs it. That's payment enough." Later, as Beatrice prepared for bed in the small but clean spare room, a soft knock came at the door. Patrick stood there, a bundle in his arms. "Martha thought these might fit you," he said, offering her the clothes, simple but sturdy garments suitable for hard traveling. "Your current dress is a bit recognizable." Beatrice accepted the bundle, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you for everything, Patrick. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there yesterday." He shook his head. "You'd have found your way. You're stronger than you realize." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Patrick stepped back. "Get some rest. We'll leave at first light before any news of your disappearance reaches this area." Beatrice nodded, watching as he turned to go. "Patrick," she called softly, stopping him. "Will you tell me more about this settlement we're heading to? I'd like to know what to expect." He smiled slightly. "It's called Silver Springs Small Place, maybe 200 people. Grew up around a strike about 5 years ago, but it's settled into something more permanent. The boarding house is run by a widow named Clara Jenkins. She doesn't ask questions about people's pasts. And after we reach there—" Beatrice asked, the question she'd been avoiding finally surfacing. "What then?" Patrick's expression grew serious. "That's for you to decide. You could stay or move on to somewhere larger. You could change your name, start fresh completely." He hesitated. "I'll help you get established, make sure you're safe before I move on." The thought of him leaving once she was settled brought an unexpected pang. "Of course," she said, masking the feeling. "I appreciate that." He studied her face for a moment. "We'll figure it out when we get there. One step at a time, remember." With that, he bid her good night, leaving Beatrice to consider the strange journey that had brought her to this point and the uncertain path that lay ahead. As she changed into the borrowed nightgown, she removed her wedding ring, staring at the gold band that had once seemed like a promise and had become a shackle. After a moment's contemplation, she tucked it into the small pouch with her money. Not to wear again, but to sell if needed. A practical decision for a woman facing an uncertain future. Morning came with a flurry of activity breakfast, packing provisions generously provided by the Petersons, and final preparations for the journey ahead. John offered them fresh horses, but Patrick declined, knowing their own mounts were rested enough and better suited to the relationship of trust they'd established with their riders. "Take the North Trail through the Pine Ridge," John advised as they prepared to depart. "Slower going but less traveled. You'll reach the old mining road by nightfall if you push on." Martha pressed a small package of food into Beatrice's hands. "For the journey," she said, before adding in a lower voice, "and this." She slipped a small knife in a leather sheath into Beatrice's pocket. "A woman should have protection of her own." The gesture touched Beatrice deeply. "Thank you," she whispered, embracing the older woman. As they rode away, Beatrice felt a curious mixture of emotions: gratitude for the Petersons' kindness, anxiety about the journey still ahead, and a growing sense of her own capacity to face whatever came. The woman who had left the Lawson ranch 2 days ago had been desperate and afraid. The woman riding beside Patrick now was finding her courage with each mile. They traveled steadily through the day, following John's directions through pine forests and rocky outcroppings that would have been impassable without guidance. Patrick remained alert, frequently checking their back trail for signs of pursuit, but they encountered no one. "How much farther to Silver Springs?" Beatrice asked as they paused to rest the horses near a small stream. 3 days, maybe 4 depending on the weather," Patrick replied, refilling their canteens. "Once we reach the old mining road tonight, the going will be easier." Beatrice nodded, stretching her tired muscles. The physical demands of their journey were significant, but she welcomed the aches as proof of her progress away from her old life. "Tell me more about Clara Jenkins," she said as they remounted. "The woman who runs the boarding house." Patrick smiled slightly. "Clara's formidable came west with her husband during the gold rush, stayed on after he died in a mine collapse. Built the boarding house herself, board by board from what I hear. Takes in travelers, miners, and people looking for a fresh start. Doesn't tolerate drunkenness or fighting in her establishment." "She sounds remarkable," Beatrice commented, trying to imagine such independence. "She is. Helped my mother and me when we passed through years ago. Gave my mother her first job teaching at the settlement school." His expression grew distant with memory. "Clara sees the worth in people, not their circumstances or mistakes." As they rode, Beatrice found herself increasingly curious about Patrick's life, the years between his escape with his mother and their current journey. He answered her questions readily enough, describing his work with horses across several territories, the skills he'd learned, the places he'd seen. Yet she sensed there were parts of his story he held back, perhaps pain too private to share, or simply the natural reserve of a man accustomed to solitary travel. They reached the old mining road as dusk fell, finding a sheltered spot to make camp nearby. The routine they established the previous night repeated, Patrick tending the horses while Beatrice prepared a simple meal from their provisions, then sharing quiet conversation by the small fire. "Your turn to rest first," Patrick said as they finished eating. "I'll wake you in a few hours." This time, Beatrice insisted. "You kept watch all night yesterday. You need proper rest too." He conceded with a nod, settling onto his bedroll while Beatrice took position near the fire, Martha's knife reassuring against her hip. As Patrick's breathing deepened into sleep, she studied his face, relaxed now in ways it never quite was when he was awake and vigilant. In the firelight, she could better see the scar along his jaw, wondering about its origin. There was a story there. She was certain one of many that had shaped this man who risked himself to help a stranger escape an abusive husband. What kind of person did that, in a world where most people looked away from others suffering? The question lingered as she kept watch through the quiet hours, alert to every sound in the wilderness around them. When the time came to wake Patrick for his shift, she found herself reluctant to disturb his rest, but knew they both needed to remain sharp for whatever challenges lay ahead. "Anything?" he asked as he sat up, immediately alert. She shook her head. "All quiet, not even a coyote." Patrick nodded, moving to add wood to the dying fire while Beatrice settled onto her own bedroll. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come, her mind filled with thoughts of Victor's pursuit, the uncertain future, and increasingly the man keeping watch just feet away. The following days fell into a pattern riding from dawn until dusk, making camp in sheltered locations, sharing simple meals and conversations that gradually revealed more of each other's histories and characters. With each passing mile, Beatrice felt the weight of her old life receding, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. Patrick proved to be not just a skilled guide but a thoughtful companion, attentive to her comfort without being condescending, respectful of her privacy while offering his own stories to fill the long hours of travel. She learned of his years working with wild horses throughout the territories, his friendship with native horse trainers who had taught him gentler methods, his dreams of someday establishing his own small ranch where he could raise horses with respect rather than dominance. In turn, Beatrice found herself sharing memories of her childhood in Carson City, her father's store, her love of books and learning that Victor had gradually restricted as distractions from wifely duties. She spoke of her cousin in San Francisco, whose letters had kept alive the idea that other lives were possible, even as Victor's control tightened around her. "I used to hide the letters in the lining of my winter boots," she confessed one evening. "It was the only place he never looked." Patrick smiled, passing her a cup of coffee. "Resourceful. That same resourcefulness will serve you well in building your new life." The casual confidence with which he spoke of her future not as something to fear, but as something to build warmed her more than the fire before them. On the afternoon of the third day since leaving the Petersons' homestead, they crested a ridge to see a small settlement nestled in the valley below a cluster of wooden buildings, a church spire, thin columns of smoke rising from chimneys. "Silver Springs," Patrick announced, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "We made it." Beatrice stared at the town, emotions warring within her. Relief at reaching relative safety, anxiety about what came next, and strangely, a touch of regret that their journey together was ending. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Patrick turned to her, his expression gentle. "Now you rest, gather your strength, and decide what you want your life to be. No one's chasing you anymore, Beatrice. No one's controlling your choices." The freedom he described was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I hardly know how to begin," she admitted. "One step at a time," he reminded her, the phrase that had become their shared mantra. "First step is getting you settled at Clara's, the rest will follow." They rode down into the town, as the sun began its descent, drawing curious glances from the few people on the main street. Silver Springs was indeed small, consisting primarily of one main thoroughfare with businesses lining both sides: a general store, a saloon, a small bank, and various other establishments serving the needs of the mining community. The boarding house stood at the far end of the street, a two-story wooden structure with a wide porch and neatly curtained windows. As they dismounted, the front door opened to reveal a tall, silver-haired woman with piercing blue eyes and a face that had weathered life's storms with dignity. "Patrick Hayes," she called, her stern expression softening into a smile. "About time you showed your face in these parts again." Patrick grinned, removing his hat as he approached the porch, Clara looking as formidable as ever. The older woman snorted, but her eyes twinkled. "And still falling for your flattery, it seems." Her gaze shifted to Beatrice. "Who's your companion?" Patrick glanced at Beatrice, allowing her to introduce herself as she chose a small but significant acknowledgement of her autonomy. "Beatrice," she said, stepping forward and offering her hand. "I'm looking for work and a place to stay while I determine my next steps." Clara's shrewd gaze took in Beatrice's borrowed clothes, her travel-worn appearance, and the absence of a surname in her introduction. After a moment, she nodded. "Well, Beatrice, you're welcome here. I have a room available, and as it happens, I could use help with the accounts and correspondence. My eyes aren't what they used to be." The offer of work, so immediate, so matter-of-fact, caught Beatrice by surprise. I would be grateful for the opportunity," she managed. "I have experience with bookkeeping." Clara nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Good. You can start tomorrow after you've rested." She turned to Patrick. "You staying too?" He hesitated, glancing at Beatrice. "For a few days, if you have the room." "Always room for you, boy. Your usual at the back." Clara gestured toward the stables behind the boarding house. "Get your horses settled, then come in for supper. You both look like you could use a proper meal." As Clara disappeared inside, Beatrice turned to Patrick. "She's exactly as you described," he chuckled, leading their horses toward the stables. "Clara doesn't waste time on pretense, sees what needs doing and does it." He glanced at her. "You'll do well with her." In the stables, they unsaddled their mounts and saw to their care before gathering their few belongings. Beatrice paused before entering the boarding house, suddenly struck by the significance of this moment, her first step into a new life of her own making. Patrick seemed to understand her hesitation. "Remember," he said gently, "you're not alone in this. Clara, the Petersons, me, we all want to see you succeed." His words gave her the courage to cross the threshold, stepping from the fading daylight into the warm interior of what would be her first real home since leaving her father's house for Victor's. The boarding house was simple but well-maintained, with a large common room furnished with comfortable chairs, and a dining area where several residents were already gathering for the evening meal. Clara introduced Beatrice simply as our new bookkeeper, asking no questions about her background and allowing others to follow her lead in welcoming the newcomer without prying. Patrick was clearly known to many of the residents, a mix of miners, a young schoolteacher, a physician, and other working people who called Silver Springs home. His easy manner helped smooth Beatrice's entrance into this small society, his presence beside her at dinner providing a buffer against too much attention. After the meal, Clara showed Beatrice to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall," she explained. "Breakfast at 7, but I'll have Patrick show you the office tomorrow whenever you're ready. No rush, you look like you've had a hard journey." Alone in her room, Beatrice sat on the edge of the narrow bed, emotions finally catching up with her now that the immediate pressure of flight had eased. She had done it, escaped Victor, traveled across mountains and wilderness, reached a place where she might begin again. The reality of it was almost too much to comprehend. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. Patrick stood there, concern evident in his expression. "Just checking that you have everything you need," he said. Beatrice nodded, suddenly overwhelmed with gratitude for this man who had made her escape possible. "I can never repay you for what you've done," she said softly. Patrick shook his head. "There's nothing to repay. You did the hardest part yourself, finding the courage to leave." "Still," she insisted, "without your help, I wouldn't have known where to go, how to avoid Victor's men. I might have been caught before I crossed the first range. Then let's just say I'm glad I was there when you needed direction." His smile was gentle. "You should rest. Tomorrow you can begin thinking about what comes next." As he turned to go, Beatrice called after him. "How long will you stay?" "In Silver Springs, I mean." Patrick paused. "A few days at least. There's a rancher north of here who might have work breaking horses. I thought I'd ride out and speak with him." The news that he might find work nearby brought an unexpected relief. Beatrice had grown accustomed to his presence, his steady support, and the thought of facing this new life entirely alone was daunting. "I'm glad," she said simply. "Good night, Patrick." "Good night, Beatrice. Sleep well." That night, in a strange bed in a town she'd never seen before yesterday, Beatrice slept more soundly than she had in years, no longer fearing the footsteps of a husband whose moods might turn violent, no longer planning her every word and gesture to avoid provoking anger. For the first time in her adult life, she was truly free. The following week passed in a blur of new routines and gradual adjustments. Clara proved to be a fair employer, showing Beatrice the boarding house books and correspondence without hovering over her work. The tasks were straightforward: recording payments, ordering supplies, responding to inquiries about accommodations, but they provided structure and purpose to days that might otherwise have been overwhelming in their newfound freedom. Patrick had ridden out to the nearby ranch as planned, but returned with news that he'd accepted a temporary position breaking horses for the owner. "It's just a few miles north," he explained over dinner his first evening back. "I can stay here at Clara's and ride out each day. The work should last a couple of months at least." Beatrice tried to hide her relief at this news, but Clara's knowing glance suggested she wasn't entirely successful. The older woman had become something of a mentor, offering practical advice about life in Silver Springs, and gradually drawing out more of Beatrice's story without ever pressing for details she wasn't ready to share. "You know," Clara said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch after dinner, "at some point you'll need to decide about your legal situation." Beatrice tensed. "My marriage, you mean?" Clara nodded. "A woman in a new place with no husband raises questions eventually, especially one wearing borrowed clothes but with the education and manners of a lady." Her direct gaze held no judgment, only practical concern. "You have options, but each has consequences. What would you suggest?" Beatrice asked, trusting the older woman's experience. Clara considered before answering. "You could claim widowhood's simplest explanation, rarely questioned, or divorce, though that carries more stigma. Or," she paused, "you could pursue an actual legal divorce, though that would mean revealing your whereabouts eventually." The thought of any legal proceeding that might bring her back into Victor's orbit made Beatrice's chest tighten with fear. "I don't think I can risk that last option. Victor would never grant a divorce willingly, and he would use any legal process to find me." Clara nodded, understanding. "Then widowhood it is, at least for public purposes. You'll need a surname." Beatrice had been avoiding this decision, still using only her first name in the small community. Taking a new surname felt like a final severing of ties with her past both her marriage and her family of birth. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," she admitted. "Consider it," Clara advised. "A woman needs a complete identity to move through the world with confidence." She rose, patting Beatrice's shoulder. "No rush. The right name will come to you when you're ready." As Clara went inside, Patrick emerged from the stables, crossing the yard toward the porch. He'd been working long hours at the ranch, returning tired but satisfied each evening. Beatrice had come to look forward to these moments, sharing the events of their respective days, enjoying the simple pleasure of conversation without fear or pretense. "You look deep in thought," he commented, settling into the chair Clara had vacated. Beatrice smiled slightly. "Clara says I need a surname, that just Beatrice won't serve indefinitely." Patrick nodded, understanding the significance of such a choice. "Any ideas?" "I've been considering something from my mother's family. Bennett, perhaps." She tested the sound of it. "Beatrice Bennett." "It suits you," he said simply. Strong, straightforward. His approval warmed her disproportionately. Over the past weeks, Beatrice had become increasingly aware of her growing feelings for Patrick, a deepening attachment that went beyond gratitude for his help or appreciation for his friendship. It was a complication she hadn't anticipated and wasn't sure how to navigate. "Patrick," she began hesitantly, "may I ask you something personal?" He turned to her, his expression open. "Of course. Why have you never settled in one place? You speak of wanting your own ranch someday, but you continue to move from job to job. Is it just that you haven't found the right place, or is there something else?" The question clearly surprised him. He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "After what happened with my father, I think part of me has always been ready to run," he finally said. "Moving becomes a habit, a way to avoid putting down roots that might be painfully torn up later." He glanced at her. "But lately, I've been reconsidering that approach." The implication in his words made Beatrice's heart beat faster. "Because of Silver Springs?" she asked, giving him the opportunity to offer a simpler explanation if he wished. His eyes held hers steadily. "Partly, but mostly because of you." The simple admission hung between them, charged with meaning neither of them was quite ready to fully articulate. "I don't know what happens next," Beatrice said softly. "I'm still finding my footing in this new life." Patrick nodded, understanding in his gaze. "There's no rush. We both have time to figure out what we want." The conversation might have continued, but the boarding house door opened as several residents stepped out to enjoy the evening air, the moment of privacy lost. Yet something had shifted between them, a mutual acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since their journey together. As summer faded into autumn, Beatrice gradually established herself in Silver Springs. With Clara's endorsement, she began keeping books for several local businesses besides the boarding house, earning enough to pay for her room and board with a small amount left for savings. She purchased fabric to sew her own clothes, donated her wedding ring to a church fundraiser for a family who had lost their home in a fire, and began to make genuine friends among the town's residents. Patrick remained at the neighboring ranch. His temporary position extended as the owner recognized his skill with difficult horses. He still stayed at Clara's, still shared meals and evening conversations with Beatrice. But a new awareness colored their interactions, a careful dance of growing attachment, tempered by mutual respect for the journey Beatrice was still undertaking toward true independence. It was Clara who finally broke the gentle stalemate between them, cornering Patrick one evening while Beatrice was meeting with the general store owner about organizing his chaotic accounts. "You're in love with her," the older woman stated without preamble as Patrick sat on the porch mending a bridle. He looked up, startled by her directness but not denying the accusation. "It's complicated," Clara snorted, "only because you're both making it so. She needs to know she has a future here if she chooses it, not just work and a room at my boarding house, but a real life with someone who cares for her." Patrick set aside the bridle. "She's just beginning to stand on her own. The last thing she needs is to feel pressure to enter another relationship before she's ready." "There's a difference between pressure and honesty," Clara countered. "That woman has had enough lies and manipulation to last a lifetime. What she deserves now is the truth, even if it's a truth that comes with the freedom to say no." Her words struck home. Patrick had been so careful not to influence Beatrice's choices, to ensure her independence, that he had perhaps denied her information relevant to those very choices. "What if she's not ready?" he asked quietly. "What if my feelings complicate the safety and stability she's just beginning to find?" Clara's expression softened. "Life is complications, boy. The question is whether they're complications worth facing together or apart." The conversation stayed with Patrick through the following days, coloring his interactions with Beatrice as he considered Clara's advice. The woman he had helped escape was flourishing in Silver Springs, growing more confident and self-reliant with each passing week. The haunted look that had marked her features at the Lawson Ranch had faded, replaced by a quiet determination and increasingly frequent smiles. He found himself wondering if he had the right to introduce a new variable into her carefully constructed stability, or if, as Clara suggested, he was withholding information that should rightfully factor into her decisions about her future. The matter came to a head unexpectedly during a Sunday afternoon ride. It had become their custom to explore the countryside around Silver Springs together on Patrick's day off, both of them finding peace in the open spaces and each other's company. On this particular autumn day, with leaves turning gold on the aspens and a crisp edge to the air, they rode to a high meadow overlooking the valley. As they dismounted to rest the horses, Beatrice turned to Patrick with unusual directness. "I've been offered a position," she announced, her expression a mix of pride and uncertainty. "A position?" he repeated, surprised. She nodded. "The bank manager in Carson City is looking for someone to organize their ledgers and correspondence. Mr. Wilson from our bank here recommended me. The salary is generous, and they would help with accommodations." The news hit Patrick with unexpected force. Carson City was a considerable distance from Silver Springs, far enough that their Sunday rides and evening conversations would end. More significantly, it would take Beatrice back into Victor's territory, where the risk of discovery was infinitely greater. "Carson City," he said carefully. "That's quite an opportunity." Beatrice watched his face, clearly searching for his reaction. It would mean leaving Silver Springs, starting over again in a larger town. Patrick struggled to maintain a supportive expression despite the sinking feeling in his chest. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me is drawn to the opportunity, the chance to build a more substantial career. But—" She hesitated, looking out over the valley rather than at him. "There are reasons to stay, too." The moment Clara had urged him toward had arrived without his planning. Patrick took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Beatrice," he said quietly, "before you decide, there's something you should know." She turned to him, a question in her eyes. "I care for you," he continued, the words both terrifying and liberating. "More than as a friend or someone I helped. Over these months, watching you build your new life, seeing your strength and determination, I've fallen in love with you." The admission hung in the clear mountain air between them. Beatrice's eyes widened, but she didn't look away. "I'm not telling you this to influence your decision about Carson City," he hurried to add. "You should make that choice based on what's best for your future. I just thought you deserved to know all the factors before deciding." To his surprise, a smile slowly spread across Beatrice's face. "I was hoping you would say something like that," she admitted softly. "I've been feeling the same way but wasn't sure if you wanted more than friendship." Relief and joy flooded through Patrick. "You have," she nodded, stepping closer to him. "Why do you think I've been so conflicted about the Carson City offer? The opportunity is excellent, but the thought of leaving you behind." She shook her head. "I couldn't imagine it." Patrick reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own. "I don't want to rush you or make you feel that your independence is threatened in any way. After what you've been through with Victor—" "You are nothing like Victor," Beatrice interrupted firmly. "From the moment we met, you've supported my choices, respected my boundaries, and believed in my capabilities. That's why I've fallen in love with you, Patrick. Not because you rescued me, but because you truly saw me when I had almost forgotten who I was beneath years of submission." Her words touched something deep within him. They stood together in the autumn sunlight, both finally acknowledging feelings that had been growing since those first dangerous days of her escape. "What do we do now?" Patrick asked, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. Beatrice considered the question seriously. "I think I'm going to decline the Carson City position. Not because of us, but because going back to that part of Nevada carries risks I'm not prepared to take yet. Victor may eventually give up searching for me, but it's too soon." Patrick nodded, understanding her reasoning. "And us," she repeated, a smile touching her lips. "I'd like to see where this leads, slowly and carefully. I'm still building my new life, still learning who Beatrice Bennett truly is. But I'd like you to be part of that discovery if you're willing." "I am," he assured her. "However long it takes, whatever pace feels right to you." Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more profound, a promise, a beginning, a choice freely made by two people who had found each other against all odds. When they returned to Silver Springs that evening, Clara took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly, but said nothing beyond a satisfied "about time" under her breath. The following months brought changes both subtle and significant. Patrick accepted a permanent position with the ranch where he'd been working, allowing him to establish roots in the community while still doing the work he loved. Beatrice continued expanding her bookkeeping services, eventually renting a small office in town where clients could meet with her professionally. Their relationship developed with careful consideration for Beatrice's ongoing journey toward full independence. They spent time together regularly, but maintained separate residences, Patrick in a small cabin on the ranch property, Beatrice still in her room at Clara's boarding house. This arrangement gave Beatrice the space she needed, while allowing their connection to deepen naturally. By the time winter settled over Silver Springs, bringing snow to the mountains and quiet evenings by the boarding house fire, they had established a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. Patrick never pushed for more than Beatrice was ready to give, and she found herself healing more rapidly with the security of his steady presence in her life. It was during a December snowfall that Patrick asked Beatrice to accompany him to the small piece of land he had just purchased, 20 acres with a creek running through it, nestled in a protected valley just outside town. "It's not much yet," he explained as they rode out, bundled against the cold. "But there's good water, decent grazing, and enough flat ground to build a proper house and stables." As they crested the final rise, Beatrice caught her breath at the beauty of the snow-covered landscape spread before them, a perfect valley framed by pines, the creek, a dark ribbon winding through white banks. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely as they dismounted. "Perfect for the horse ranch you've always wanted." Patrick nodded, his expression serious as he turned to her. That's what I'm hoping to build here, a place where horses can be trained with respect, where their spirit isn't broken but guided, a place that stands for a different way of doing things. He took her gloved hands in his, and I'm hoping. That is, I would be honored if you would consider building it with me, not just as my bookkeeper, he added with a small smile, but as my wife. Though they had grown increasingly close, the proposal caught Beatrice by surprise. She looked out over the valley, then back to the man beside her, this man who had helped her escape one life and find the courage to create another. "Are you certain?" she asked quietly. "My situation is complicated. Victor has never formally divorced me. In the eyes of the law, I don't care about legal technicalities," Patrick interrupted gently. "We can be married in our hearts and in the eyes of this community. If someday it becomes possible to make it official without risk to your safety, we will. But I don't need a document to know that I want to build a life with you, Beatrice." His understanding of her situation, his willingness to accept the complications of loving a woman who was technically still married to another man, moved her deeply. "Then yes," she said, her heart full. "I would be honored to build this dream with you, Patrick. As your partner, your wife in every way that matters." Their embrace sealed the promise, snowflakes falling around them like nature's blessing on a union that defied convention but honored the deepest truths of love and respect. Spring arrived with new beginnings. Construction began on a modest house and stables on Patrick's land, with help from friends they'd made in Silver Springs. Beatrice continued her bookkeeping business while helping design their future home, insisting on plenty of bookshelves and a small office where she could continue her work. They were married in April in a simple ceremony at Clara's boarding house, attended by the friends who had become their extended family. Though not legally recognized due to the complications of Beatrice's previous marriage, their union was blessed by the local minister and celebrated by the community that had embraced them both. "I, Patrick, take you, Beatrice, as my partner in all things," Patrick vowed, holding her hands in his. "I promise to respect your independence even as we build a life together, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, and to love you with patience and constancy all the days of my life." Beatrice's answering vows acknowledged the journey that had brought them to this point. "I, Beatrice, take you, Patrick, as my partner in all things. From the day you helped me find courage to seek freedom, you have shown me what true partnership means. I promise to build our future with the same strength and determination that brought me to you, to honor your gentle spirit, and to love you faithfully all the days of my life." Clara, serving as their witness, wiped away uncharacteristic tears as they exchanged simple silver rings, symbols of a bond that needed no legal sanction to be profound and true. Their new home was completed by early summer, a sturdy structure built with care and attention to detail. The stables followed shortly after, and Patrick began the work of establishing his horse training business, his reputation for gentle but effective methods quickly spreading among local ranchers. Together, they created the life they had each dreamed of separately, Patrick working with horses in a way that honored their nature, Beatrice maintaining her independence through her thriving bookkeeping practice while helping manage their growing ranch. They complemented each other perfectly, her organizational skills balancing his practical knowledge, his patience tempering her occasional impatience. News came occasionally from their old territory, rumors carried by travelers or letters from distant acquaintances. Victor Lawson had apparently remarried within 6 months of Beatrice's disappearance, a wealthy widow from Sacramento who brought substantial properties to the union. There was no mention of any continuing search for his former wife. It seemed he had moved on to new conquests and ambitions. The knowledge brought Beatrice final closure, a releasing of the last threads of fear that had lingered despite the distance and time. She was truly free now, not just physically away from Victor's control, but emotionally liberated from the shadow of his potential pursuit. On the first anniversary of their arrival in Silver Springs, Beatrice and Patrick stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. Their small ranch was thriving, 6 horses in training, a reputation for excellence spreading beyond their immediate area, and a sense of purpose that fulfilled them both. "I never imagined this," Beatrice said softly, leaning against Patrick's solid warmth. "When I rode away from Victor's ranch that morning, I was just running from something terrible. I never dreamed I was running towards something so beautiful." Patrick's arm tightened around her waist. "You created this, Beatrice. Your courage, your determination. I just provided directions." She shook her head, turning to face him. "We created it together. That's what makes it different from anything I've known before. It's truly ours, built on mutual respect and love." As the last light faded from the sky, they remained on the porch, planning the next phase of their ranch's development, discussing Beatrice's newest clients, imagining the future they continued to build day by day. In the stables nearby, the black stallion that had started their journey, purchased from a surprised Victor Lawson by a third party acting on Patrick's behalf, whickered softly to his mare. Both animals content in their new home where their spirits remained gloriously intact. 2 years later, their family expanded with the birth of their son, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit. They named him John, after the Peterson patriarch who had helped make their escape possible. As Beatrice cradled their child with Patrick seated beside her on their bed, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from captivity to freedom, from isolation to community, from fear to love. "He's perfect," Patrick said, gently touching his son's tiny hand. "He is," Beatrice agreed. "And he'll grow up seeing what a true partnership looks like. He'll learn from you how to respect others' spirits, not break them." Patrick's eyes met hers, full of love and promise. "And he'll learn from you that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to move forward despite it." Outside their window, spring was turning the valley green again, new life emerging after winter's rest. Their horses grazed peacefully in the meadow, their business continued to prosper, and their home stood as testimony to what could be built when two people chose to honor each other's essential nature. Beatrice Hayes, once trapped in a loveless marriage, had found not just escape but a life rich with purpose and love. The cowboy who had helped her flee had become the partner with whom she built a future, not by breaking her spirit, but by recognizing its value and helping it flourish in freedom. As darkness fell and their son slept peacefully between them, Beatrice and Patrick shared a quiet smile, secure in the knowledge that some wild things were never meant to be tamed, only loved for exactly what they were.